I was fired by my boss 11 days before my retirement bonus was scheduled to begin after 27 years of service. But then I made... There is no benefit for senior citizens. The manila envelope was slid across the glass conference table by Carson Vickery, who appeared to be dealing cards while doing so. Through the pounding of the rain on the windows behind him, his voice seemed much chillier than it normally would have. I introduced myself as Leonard Abrams. At the age of 60, I had been employed at Iron Ridge Components for a total of 27 years. If I had waited 11 days, I would have been eligible to receive my retirement bonus of $94,000. Instead, I found myself sitting in this antiseptic room listening to a tech guy who was 45 years old inform me that my time had come to an end. Carson continued, adjusting his fancy glasses as he explained that we are being restructured. Get the severance signed by Friday, or you will receive nothing. My eyes were drawn to the packet, a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working anywhere in the business for a period of 2 years. Standard termination papers and a modest severance offer were all included in the negotiations. These are the kinds of deals that businesses offer when they want you to leave but don't want to risk legal action. I stated that I understood. Because of the opportunity, thank you. He blinked his eyes. Most likely, he had anticipated that I would fight, beg, or threaten to take legal action. Instead, I got to my feet, shook his hand, and then set out of the room. That afternoon, the floor of the warehouse had a strange sensation. A total of 27 years spent strolling these aisles, checking inventory, providing training to newly hired employees, and resolving issues that management was completely unaware previously. When I was here, old Mr. Hendricks was in charge of the establishment, and he did so from a metal desk in the corner. The fire that occurred in the warehouse in 2018, the recession that came dangerously close to taking our lives in 2009, and 3 distinct computer system overhauls that each promised to transform everything were all things that I had survived. Now, Carson Vickery, who had been hired from a software business in Cincinnati around 6 months prior, was being responsible for cleaning the house. According to what I had overheard him saying to Felicia Tran from Human Resources, he was getting rid of the dead weight. I took my time packing up my desk. Even though 27 years will not fit in a single cardboard box, I managed to make it work. The mug of coffee that my daughter selected for me as a Father's Day gift. Helen, my late wife, was captured in this modest photograph taken at the workplace picnic in the year 2015. An accumulation of safety medals and productivity certifications that were formerly significant in their own right. I was in the process of sealing the box when I was approached by Tommy Rodriguez, who was one of the forklift operators that I had trained. In a low voice, he whispered to Mr. Abrams, "This is not right. Everyone is aware that you ought to be awarded that bonus." Tommy, there are times when things do not go according to the plans that we had. He gave me the impression that he wanted to give me more information, but I simply gave him a shoulder pat and then left the room. Almost as long as I had been employed here, Pete Williams, the security guard, had been working here. While I was handing him my badge and keys, he avoided making eye contact with me. Every one of us was aware that this was not about performance or reorganization. Making place for Carson's employees and saving the corporation $94,000 were the 2 main goals of this situation. The rain was falling as I drove home, and I was thinking about the phone calls that I needed to make. When I was 33 years old, I had just finished my time in the military and was seeking for a job that would provide me with a consistent income. We were in need of health insurance because Helen was expecting our daughter Jessica, and we were pregnant. What started out as a temporary job in a warehouse transformed into a job that lasted for almost 30 years of my life. The company was responsible for the production of metal fasteners and hardware supplies for both industrial and construction. Customers located throughout the Midwest. A steady job that paid well enough to buy a house, raise a family, and save for retirement was all that was required. There was nothing exciting about it. My first several years were spent working nights and weekends, during which time I became familiar with every facet of the business. I was a part of the process of designing the new warehouse layout and writing the majority of the training manuals by hand when Mr. Hendricks made the decision to extend his distribution from the local to the regional level. I was the one who instructed the more senior employees on how to utilize the first computer system that was introduced to the workplace. Helen used to make fun of the fact that I was more concerned about that location than for our own garage. Indeed, she was correct. My job, my ability to solve problems, and my status as the person that management could rely on when things went awry were all things that I took great satisfaction in. It had been 6 months since Carson Vickery had come, and he had came with great goals and huge ideas. After 30 years of service, the previous CEO, James Mitchell, had decided to retire, and the board of directors decided to hire Carson in order to modernize operations and enhance efficiency. When Carson was working for a technology business, everything was driven by data, and employees were considered resources that needed to be optimized. When we initially met, things did not go as planned. Carson had referred to it as a strategic alignment discussion, but we received the impression that it was more of an interrogation. This individual had inquired as to why we continued to make use of paper logs for some inventory tracking, why our safety meetings were held on a weekly basis rather than on a monthly basis, and why we had not automated a greater portion of the warehouse operations. I emphasized that paper logs never crashed, that weekly safety meetings discovered problems before they became accidents, and that automation worked wonderfully to the point where it broke down, and that in order to correct it, you required people who actually understood the equipment. Carson had given me a friendly smile and nod, but I could tell that he had already dismissed me as just another old-timer who was resistant to change. It was first early retirement packages for the legacy staff, and then it was performance improvement programs for individuals who had been performing their jobs absolutely fine for years. I had observed him do this over the course of the subsequent months. He had systematically pushed out anyone who was over the age of 50. Initially, it was early retirement packages. Last but not least, he decided to terminate anyone who questioned his methods as an absolute necessity. A few weeks ago, Felicia Tran, who was the head of human resources, had attempted to warn me about something. We had been working together for 15 years, and she was aware that I was very near to being eligible for retirement. During a fortuitous encounter in the parking lot, she had suggested to Leonard that he might have a look at the possibility of retiring earlier than planned. There have been a number of inquiries from Carson regarding the remuneration package that you receive. It would have been better for me to pay attention and see the warning signs when 3 other senior employees were abruptly terminated due to performance difficulties only a few weeks before their retirement incentives were scheduled to begin. On the other hand, I had anticipated that they would not dare to touch me. It would not be possible after 27 years, after everything I had accomplished for that organization. I had a mistake. During that evening, I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the paperwork regarding the severance that was laid out across Helen's old wooden table. Even though the rain had ceased, the silence seemed to be more oppressive than the storm. It is $94,000. That is the value that Iron Ridge Components placed on a devoted customer for a period of 27 years. It would have been mined according to the contract if 11 more days had passed. Carson Vickery, on the other hand, had discovered a method to save the company money by eliminating my position right before the deadline. I found the offer of severance to be offensive. My health insurance will be extended for an additional 3 months, and I will receive 6 weeks of compensation. After almost 30 years of transforming that company from a modest regional supplier into a large distributor in the Midwest, they were providing me the same compensation that they would give to any other random worker who was terminated from their position. After retrieving the employee handbook that I had contributed to writing in 2009, I went to the section that was devoted to retirement benefits and read the language that I had personally negotiated with the management team that had been in place before. Individuals who had worked for the company for a period of 25 years or more and had reached the age of 60 were eligible to receive the retirement bonus. Additionally, there was meant to be a grace period, which would have served as a safeguard against situations like this one. Carson, however, was young. It is possible that he is unaware of the protective clauses that are concealed inside policies that were in place before he arrived. Maybe he was aware of it and assumed that I wouldn't put up a fight. There was a possibility that I would phone Jessica in Chicago. At that point in time, she was a successful corporate lawyer who was also quite busy with her own family. I had declined her offer to look over my retirement paperwork several months ago, but she had volunteered to do so. I reassured her that everything was taken care of and didn't need to worry about her elderly father. Satisfaction. What prevented me from making the call earlier was because of it. Rather than that, I took out my phone and went through my contacts until I located the number that I required. Mitchell Goldstein, the son of my sister, was a labor attorney in Columbus who specialized in employment law when he graduated from college. At the burial for Helen, which took place 2 years ago, we had a conversation, and he had handed me his card with a brief note on it. Families are able to assist one another. Dial my number if you ever require anything. There were 3 rings on the phone before he finally picked it up. To my Uncle Leonard, how are things going? I informed him about Carson, explained the timing, and informed him about the offer of severance. Mitchell did not interrupt me while I was speaking, and he asked only a few specific questions about my employment contract and the retirement program of the company. Eventually, Uncle Leonard stated, "I think you might want to hold off on signing those papers." He was surprised by his own words. "Would you be able to scan everything and send it to me by email tonight? Do you believe that there is something there?" A mistake was committed by Carson Vickery, in my opinion. It is going to cost him a great deal more than $94,000, if I am correct in my estimation. When I finished my call, I went back to the table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down again. After leaving that meeting room, I couldn't help but feel something other than resignation for the very first time during that time. I had the impression that perhaps this conflict was not yet done. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Mitchell gave me a call. This morning, Tuesday. At that moment, I was already awake, sipping coffee and gazing out the window at the dreary October sky. Mr. Leonard, we have to have a conversation, that is, in person. Today, would you be able to travel to Columbus? His office was located in a modern building in the heart of the city, and it smelled like freshly painted walls and nice carpet. It was more difficult for me to remember that Mitchell resembled his mother. He had sharp eyes that were hidden beneath wire-rimmed glasses, and he exuded the kind of focused energy that inspired you to comprehend the reasons behind his success. In the absence of any prelude, he stated that Carson Vickery had made a mistake, while simultaneously distributing my employment documents on his conference table. Take note of this. He directed my attention to a portion of the employee handbook that I had neglected to examine. Retirement Benefit Protection Clause, Policy 4.7b, has been implemented. It was specified that any employee who was within 30 days of becoming eligible for a retirement bonus could not be terminated without a valid reason, and that termination for the purpose of restructuring within this window was considered a breach of employment contract. I was helping to write this. It was a sluggish voice. Over the course of James Mitchell's tenure as CEO, we experienced issues with employees being terminated just before to the time when their pensions became fully vested. Carson, on the other hand, is either unaware of the situation or is betting that you will not put up a fight. Mitchell leaned in that direction. Right now, this is what we are going to do. Those severance agreements are not going to be signed by you. Instead, you are going to make a formal request to meet with Human Resources in order to negotiate the circumstances of your termination. HR is managed by Felicia Tran. Although she is a decent person, she will not have Carson in her corner. Should she become aware that the company is on the verge of being sued, she will do so. Leonard, let me tell you that this is no longer simply about your bonus. It is possible that Carson has been engaging in discriminatory behavior if he has been firing employees in a systematic manner before the retirement benefits they are entitled to begin. Indeed, this is a federal matter. After that, I went to Mitchell's office and spent the next 2 hours going over every aspect of my firing and the events that led up to it. The questions he asked were about Carson's stated reasons for restructuring, about any documentation I might have, and about other employees who had been let go recently. He took notes on a yellow legal pad and asked questions about these employees. Do you still have access to the email account you use for work? He inquired about it. Right up till Thursday. After that, they severed my connection. Everything should be printed. Each and every email that Carson sent regarding the reorganization, each and every letter regarding the modifications to the policies, and each and every communication regarding your firing. A paper trail is going to be necessary for us. As I made my way back to Dayton, I got the sensation that I had a purpose once more. Carson, on the other hand, was ready for me when I came at Iron Ridge Components on Wednesday morning to wipe up the files that were still in my possession and print off my emails. Leonard, he began, making his appearance in the corridor as if he had been kept on the lookout for me. It seemed to me that you had already left. I answered that I was just finishing up some paperwork on them. I really need to have a conversation with you. A motion was made toward his office by him. About the severance package you received. His office was completely made of chrome and glass. There is nothing that can compare to the cozy interior with wood panels that James Mitchell used to work in. Taking a seat behind his enormous desk, Carson retrieved a revised version of the separation agreement it contained. He stated that he had been thinking about the chat that we had on Monday. I want to make sure that you are well taken care of because you have been an extremely important employee. The amount of your severance pay has been increased to 12 weeks' worth of pay. Despite the fact that the new amount was significantly more than the initial offer, it was still not anywhere close to accounting for my retirement bonus. In addition, Carson continued, there is one stipulation. Please sign this document today. Additionally, it is evident that the non-compete condition is still in existence. Attempting to buy me off was his goal. The question that needed to be answered was whether or not he was aware of the policy breach, or whether he was simply attempting to wrap things up before it became a problem. I am grateful to you, Carson, for the offer. To give it some more thought, however, I need a few more days. His smile became more tense. At this point, Leonard, I'm attempting to be generous. However, this deal will no longer be valid after today's business end. Following that, we will return to the terms that were first agreed upon. It is clear to me. Immediately after leaving his office, I made my way to the floor of the warehouse. It was around 6 hours before Carson's deadline, and I needed to print every email that I could find. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had 47 pages of papers concealed in my truck. I went back into Carson's office at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and informed him that I required further time to think over his offer. It was officially back to the original severance terms for me at 5 minutes past 5 o'clock. And at that time, I was well aware that we had him. When Mitchell called on Thursday morning, he shared some news that completely altered everything. Leonard, I have been conducting research regarding the employment history of Iron Ridge Components in recent times. A total of 7 employees who were within 60 days of receiving significant retirement incentives or pension milestones were let go by Carson during the course of the preceding 8 months. In my kitchen chair, I sat down with a firm grip. 7th. 3-year-old George Murphy, who worked in quality control, was terminated 3 weeks before he was scheduled to receive his 30-year pension bonus. Patricia Walsh, who was 58 years old and worked in accounting, was let go 2 months before she became eligible for early retirement. I also have 5 more that are identical to them. In spite of the fact that the coffee in my cup had become ice cold, I was unable to detect any flavor. These were not merely numerical values. It had been decades since I had worked with these individuals. As soon as I started working here, George provided me with training on the methods for quality inspection. Patricia had assisted me in navigating the paperwork that I needed to complete in order to make adjustments to my health insurance when Helen was unwell. What is the legality of this, Mitchell? How does Carson manage to get away with doing this? As a result of the fact that every termination was documented as being performance-based or related to restructuring, and the majority of these individuals simply accepted their termination and left the company. They reasoned that the cost of challenging the firm would be greater than the amount of money they would collect. However, they miscalculated. Not even close. Please, Leonard, this is no longer only a case of unfair termination. This constitutes discrimination based on age. Moreover, it is methodical. For the purpose of avoiding the payment of retirement benefits, Carson has been deliberately targeting seniors in the workforce. It is a violation of federal law. It was informed by Mitchell that he had spent the previous day making contact with the employees who had been sacked. These 3 individuals still possessed paperwork of their terminations. The 2 were willing to participate in a possible legal action. And one of them, George Murphy, had recorded a conversation in which Carson made a specific reference to the fact that he could save money by getting rid of the deadweight before it became too expensive. Was he taken down by George? On his mobile device. It was a mystery to Carson. Nevertheless, George had a sneaking suspicion that something was amiss, and he desired evidence for his own safety. This recording is the most convincing evidence possible, Leonard. There was George in my thoughts, a man who was reserved and had worked in quality control for 32 years. His approach had always been cautious and meticulous, that type of person who was able to identify issues before they escalated into catastrophes. Without a doubt, he would have carefully chronicled Carson's errors. What takes place at this moment? At this time, we notify the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission of our intention to file a formal complaint. At Iron Ridge Components, we would like to propose that an investigation be conducted into age discrimination. We also file a class action lawsuit in order to get compensation for all of the employees who were impacted. What kind of time will this take? There are months, possibly 1 year. On the other hand, Leonard, we are no longer merely challenging you for your bonus. Everyone that Carson has hurt is the target of our fight. We are going to take measures to ensure that he is unable to do this to anyone else. It was that afternoon when I made my way to the residence of George Murphy in Kettering. He resided in a humble ranch house that featured a garden that was meticulously cared for and an American flag that was displayed by the front entrance. When he responded, he appeared to be much older than his actual age of 63. He said to me, "Leonard, I heard about what happened to you," and then invited me to come in for some coffee. That is exactly what they did to me. We had a conversation that lasted for 2 hours. George had been employed by Iron Ridge since 1991, during which time he had established a reputation for being the most meticulous quality inspector in the history of the company. As soon as Carson arrived, he immediately began to challenge George's techniques, asserting that they were ineffective and out of date. In the previous month, he invited me to come into his office, George stated. The organization informed me that it was heading in a new path, and that it required individuals who were capable of adapting to modern techniques. I asked him what that meant, and he responded by saying, "Sincerely, George, we require a greater number of fresh thinkers and fewer gray heads." Does he say that? It was taped by me. It occurred to me that I could require proof at a later time. To listen to the recording, George played it on his phone. It was clear, casual, and damning to hear Carson's voice. In the evening, I called Mitchell and left him a single, straightforward message. Complaint should be filed. Every single thing. Stop this right now. Something that I hadn't done in 27 years was something that I did on Friday morning. I called in sick to work, I said. I decided to go to Columbus and spend the day in Mitchell's office, where we were putting the finishing touches on our strategy, rather than going to Iron Ridge Components. We had filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission by lunchtime, charging that Iron Ridge Components engaged in age discrimination on a regular basis. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we had submitted a class action case to a federal court, demanding damages for 8 employees who had been unlawfully terminated. It was 3 o'clock when Mitchell made a direct phone call to Felicia Tran. After I had hung up the phone, Mitchell informed me that he had explained the matter to her. She has been working for the corporation for 15 years, and she is well aware of everything that has been going on. Furthermore, she is aware that in the event that this matter is brought to trial, her department will appear at best incompetent and at worst complicit. To what did she respond? For the purpose of reviewing the employee files and consulting with the legal counsel of the company, she requested 24 hours. As I drove home, I had the impression that we had gone too far. One could not turn back at this point. This dispute would either end in our victory, or Carson would take measures to ensure that I never again worked in the sector. On the Saturday, I received a phone call from Tommy Rodriguez. Mr. Abrams, there is a peculiar occurrence taking place here. Carson held an emergency meeting yesterday afternoon, brought in some attorneys from Cincinnati, and today he has been combing over personnel files all morning. He also brought in some attorneys from Cincinnati. My dear Tommy, you must exercise caution. Don't engage in any behavior that might bring you into more difficulty. However, I believed it would be important for you to hear this. Since the previous day, Felicia has been attending meetings with the attorney, and it has been reported that Carson is really unhappy about something. An update was provided by Mitchell over the phone on Sunday evening. A meeting was asked by Felicia to take place on Monday morning. Before we move any farther with this, she would like to have a conversation about a possible resolution. Which type of resolution is this? The kind in which they acknowledge that they engaged in error and make an effort to rectify the situation before a federal judge orders them to pay punitive penalties. Putting in my best suit, I got in my car and went to Columbus on Monday morning. The meeting was scheduled to take place at Mitchell's office rather than at Iron Ridge Components, as Mitchell had taken the necessary arrangements. Ground that is neutral. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Felicia showed up, along with 2 attorneys that I was unfamiliar with. If she hadn't been getting enough sleep, she appeared to be exhausted. Leonard, she instructed me as she shook my hand. What occurred to you and the others was not in accordance with the policies of the organization, and I want you to know that. Carson took action without first consulting with human resources or legal counsel as his proper course of action. The position was taken over by one of the attorneys, a woman in her 40s with graying hair. Mr. Abrams, my client is willing to offer a complete settlement that would include full retirement benefits for all impacted employees, in addition to additional compensation for the hardship caused by these illegal terminations. This payout would be offered under the terms of the agreement. Mitchell leaned in that direction. What about the employment situation of Mr. Vickery? 2 glances were exchanged between Felicia and the attorney. Iron Ridge Components is no longer employing Mr. Vickery in any capacity. The termination of his employment took effect as of the close of business on Friday. Something in my chest began to relax, and I felt it. Sadly, Carson had left. Felicia continued by saying that the board of directors has requested that I personally apologize to you and the other employees who were terminated in an inappropriate manner. In terms of our oversight, this was a significant failure, and we are dedicated to putting things right. We then proceeded to negotiate the details for the next 3 hours. I had my retirement bonus of $94,000, which included interest by the time the meeting came to a close. I was in possession of 2 years' worth of deferred retirement payments, which the firm had been secretly protecting from me. In addition, I had a formal apology that was going to be included in my workers' file. Most significantly, George Murphy and the 6 other employees who were terminated would get compensation that was comparable to their previous pay. Mitchell reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder as we were leaving the building. Uncle Leonard Carson Vickery has recently discovered that there are some veterans who are well-versed in the art of fighting back. On Tuesday morning, I was contacted by James Mitchell, who had previously served as the chief executive officer of Iron Ridge Components. Leonard, I was informed of the events that transpired with Carson. My apologies. But that is not the kind of business that we established. The situation is being managed, Mr. Mitchell. It's true. I was given more information by Felicia. I have been asked to return to my position as temporary CEO by the board, while they continue their search for Carson's successor. I wanted to give you a call and wonder if you would be open to sticking on. Someone with your level of experience is required to assist us in getting things back on track. I turned my head to gaze out the window of my kitchen and saw the maple tree that Helen had planted as soon as we had purchased the house. As the leaves prepared for winter, they were turning a golden and scarlet color. I am grateful for the offer, but I believe that it is time for me to retire in a more secure manner. It is clear to me. However, Leonard, I would like you to be aware of something. In order to ensure that anything like this never occurs again, the board is formulating new procedures. When an employee is within 60 days of becoming eligible for retirement, they cannot be discharged without the approval of the board. Additionally, we are mandating that all top management receive training on employment law and matters pertaining to age discrimination. I am pleased to learn that. Something else is going on here. The new employee protection policy will be named after you, according to the vote of the board. Fair Employment Protection Policy, which was developed by Leonard Abrams. Each and every new employee orientation will include this component. I made my final trip to Iron Ridge Components on Wednesday afternoon using my own vehicle, not to empty out my desk or hand in my equipment, but rather to pick up the final documentation for my retirement and the bonus check I was expecting. Felicia was waiting for me in the lobby. In addition to a tiny wooden plaque, she presented me with an envelope. She expressed gratitude to all of us who plan to remain, saying, "Thank you for fighting for what was right." Over the course of 27 years of devoted work, Leonard Abrams was honored with a plaque. a man who advocated on our behalf in every way. One more time, I made my way through the factory warehouse. The workers, including Tommy Rodriguez and a few others, paused what they were doing in order to shake my hand. He was aware of what had transpired, and they were aware that Carson had vanished. Tommy remarked that, "Mr. Abrams, you had succeeded. You are one of those cretins." "Tommy, we were all doing it. Never again should you allow someone to treat you in such a manner. My retirement bonus and your back contributions were placed into my account on Thursday morning. It is $137,412. This includes not only the money that Carson attempted to steal, but also everything that the corporation had covertly put off for a number of years. An appointment with a financial counselor on my actual retirement was scheduled for the afternoon, and I spent it at the bank. I was able to make plans for the future for the first time in months without having to worry about paying my legal expenses or finding another work when I was 60 years old. On Friday, I discovered that George Murphy had called me. "Let me express my gratitude to you, Leonard. I received my payment yesterday, along with the interest. Although Carson caused me to lose 3 months of my retirement, I am in a better position now than I would have been if he had never bothered me in the first place. Now, George, what are you going to do with your life?" "My grandson has specifically requested that I instruct him in the art of woodworking. I believe I will construct a treehouse for him." That particular weekend, Jessica and her family made the trip from Chicago to the South. I had the pleasure of reading Carson's severance papers for the first time at the kitchen table, where we had dinner. As we conversed, my grandson entertained himself by playing with toy vehicles on the floor. Jessica, the daughter, told her father, "I am proud of you for fighting back." The mother would have been pleased as well. When I thought of Helen, I reflected on the retirement plans that we had established together. Without having to worry about her employment schedule, she had a desire to travel, to visit the national parks, and to spend time with our grandchildren. I told Jessica that I was considering purchasing a recreational vehicle, RV. Is that true? As a child, your mother had a strong desire to visit the Grand Canyon. On a Sunday evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer in my hand and watched the sun set through the golden leaves of the maple tree. I was able to hear children playing, dogs barking, and life going on as it should be, going on somewhere in the distant. With only one meeting and a manila envelope, Carson Vickery had attempted to take 27 years' worth of labor that I had done throughout my life. Instead, he had provided me with something more pleasant, having the awareness that there are moments when you are successful when you speak up for what is right. There are times when the most difficult battle is the one that you had hoped you would never have to face. On the other hand, it is also the one that forces you to remember who you truly are.